Hi BookTube, I'm here today with video 3 for my comic week, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite comics, actually with a bit of a caveat. They're going to be lesser known ones, I find. So some of my favorite comics are actually some very well known comics, and you've probably seen them a million times because they've been recommended on top lists all the time. So I'm also not going to include any DC or Marvel superhero comics because they're more well known, but some of my favorite include DC's Injustice series, Gods Among Us, The Dark Knight, Batman Damned, Batman War and Crime. I'm also not going to be including comics that will be on every list when you search for best comics ever. So some of my favorites from that list include obviously Sandman, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, of course. I'm also not going to be including Fables, although it's one of my all-time favorite comics, because it's just another well-known comic. So what are my top 5 comics? Well, before I get to that, let's do an honorable mention, because what would a book list be without an honorable mention? And that's going to be the Collected Toppi. This is a series of weird stories by Sergio Toppi, and they're translated from the Italian. The art is all black and white, but it's not just that straight up, coloring in the lines or shading type. He fills the spaces with these intricate little patterns. One of my favorite stories from the collection is called Solitudinus Morbus, which is about a late housekeeper going mad. Let's start at the top. Number 5, American Splendor. This is a series of comics written by Harvey Picard, and all drawn by different artists. All his comics contain autobiographical content, if not just straight up random scenes from his life. One of my favorite specific volumes is Unsung Hero, which is actually about a black soldier during the Vietnam War. So what I love about American Splendor is how normal the stories are. There's one issue which is just a phone conversation with one of his friends. It's also interesting that the stories are illustrated by a variety of different artists, but Picard also doesn't shy away from talking about tougher issues like racism and living a working class life. So I'd recommend American Splendor for people who like reading Bukowski or Kerouac and other authors that write about that kind of nitty-gritty side of life. I'd also recommend this for fans of slice of life mangas who are looking to get into Western comics, because it is very much slice of life. Number 4 actually made my list of favorite books last year, and that's called My Favorite Thing is Monsters. This was written and drawn by Emile Ferris. It's about a young girl obsessed with monsters and like those B movies, and she's investigating the death of her neighbor while dealing with her own personal and family issues. One of my favorite things about this comic is that it feels like it's reading a very creative artist's journal. The background of all the pages mimic lined paper, and there are times where the art isn't as detailed or colored to reflect that different aspects of the stories. I love the depth also that the story goes into, especially its exploration of history through personal lives. And the art is also very colorful and very pleasing to look at. I think this is a great starter comic. It reads more like a journal than a traditional comic with mostly speech bubbles, and the art is also very appealing. Third on my list is It's a Bird. It's an autobiographical comic, but it's also a comic about health issues. So this is written by Stephen T. Seagal with art by Teddy Christensen. So Stephen in the comic has been approached by DC to write a Superman comic, which is a huge achievement for a comic writer. But he's also dealing with this family history of Huntington's disease. There are so many reasons why I love this comic. Firstly, seeing a comic that deals with normal human death as opposed to like supernatural death and big bang pow signs. This is human real life stuff. And dealing with disease, that was really interesting to see. It was also the first time that I've seen a piece of art that actually captured what a dying person looks like. And I can attest to that as someone who works in palliative care as well. It was really striking to see that image on the page. The other more light reason I'd say I love this comic is its meta-commentary on Superman, and Seagal's back and forth with how he's going to make him a relatable character to the average human because, Superman isn't your average man. This comic I'd recommend to people who are actually familiar with superhero comics and are looking to branch out maybe into graphic memoirs. And you have to have a bit of an idea of who Superman is and have read a bit of Superman comics to kind of understand all the Superman references, but I'd still highly recommend it to anyone. Number 2 on my list is The People Inside. This is written and drawn by Ray Fox. This has one of my favorite writing tropes, where it's multiple stories jumping back and forth between those different stories by writing, say, one sentence or a few sentences of each story and then follow it with the next story and then jumping on to a next story. And that is this done in comic form. Each square is its own story, and it seems really confusing at first when you're reading it because you think it's all one big thing. But the simplicity of the stories and the kind of overarching theme that it explores actually make it quite easy to understand. So don't let that multiple storylines all at once confuse you. Another great thing about this comic is that Fox is able to convey such emotion without words. And you definitely come out of this comic, you know, with your feelings wrecked. I audibly shouted no and oh my god at certain scenes when I was first reading this comic. I'd recommend this if you're interested in experimental literature of any kind. You should definitely check this out. I'd also recommend this if you're looking to branch out of, you know, science fiction, fantasy, superhero comics, and you're looking for something more contemporary, I guess would be the theme or genre here. And would it be my favorite comic book recommendation if I didn't mention Moonshadow? You're probably sick of hearing me talk about that here. Yeah, if you spent any time on my channel, you've probably heard me talk about this comic. This is not only one of my favorite comics, but one of my favorite books of all time. Moonshadow is written by J.M. DeMatteis with art by John J. Muth. And this is the story of Moonshadow, who's a young boy who's the child of a human hippie and this god orb alien thing. He goes on a journey across space with his mother, his cat named Frodo, and a hedonistic cousin it-like alien named Ira. The elements of this comic that capitulated it into the top spot here are the character development, the art, the quotes at the beginning of each volume. I loved how juxtaposed the innocence of Moonshadow was with the grossness of Ira, and seeing how they kind of grew together. The art is done in watercolors, which was actually a first for comics here. And it's beautiful. It really adds to the atmosphere of the story. I also appreciated that there were times when I was reading it and I had to stop and think about what I just read. One quote that I still take with me today is, "Start learning to love God by loving those you cannot love." And this series is not religious, just because I've mentioned that quote. It does talk about religion, but it's not religious. It just really makes sense in the context, that quote. And I can go on and on about this comic. I want to say that everyone should read this comic, and I do think everyone should read it, but I know that not everyone would love this comic as I do. I'd say this is a great comic if you're looking for something more literary and for art that will make you stop and really appreciate it. So you heard me, so I can go on and on about how awesome this comic is, but I'm going to stop there and hope that you pick it up. So thank you for watching, and my question for you is, what is your favorite comic, and maybe one of your favorite lesser known comics? Thank you for watching.